Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Gloucestershire Climate Forum at the Business Insights Festival 2021. Gloucestershire and the Southwest region are home to some of the largest and most influential energy generation and distribution businesses in Europe. We also have a diverse and innovative culture of small and medium-sized businesses that both generate renewable and sustainable energy, distribute across micro networks, and also invest heavily in renewables, carbon capture, energy efficiency, and transport. We also have some of the most forward-thinking local governments in the country, all of whom have declared a climate emergency and have made commitments to achieving carbon neutrality or net zero greenhouse gas emissions ahead of the UK's government's target of 2050. At the Climate Forum last November, James Clark of 7Y said we need to take bold steps to achieve this. So I'd like to focus today as much as possible on solutions. What are the key actions we need to take in the county to achieve net zero emissions, and how can we scale up what's already working? How do we start making big steps forward rather than skirt around the edges? And what can we do locally to create a system that promotes and enables low carbon development? This afternoon, we have an excellent array of leaders and decision makers from business, local government and not-for-profit sectors to discuss how this important area for everyone will evolve, challenge and create opportunities for the county moving forward. If you have questions, do feel free to put them in the chat. We'll also have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. So let me introduce your panelists for today. Oh, before I do that, can I just ask you to all, if you could keep your microphones on mute until you're introduced and asked to speak, that would be very helpful. So let me introduce your panelists. First, I'm going to introduce Richard Lupo. Richard is a chartered environmentalist and MD of Sus Housing, who do environmental reporting, road mapping and strategy development for those working in the built environment. Clients include housing associations, councils, developers, supply chain, and 1 millionaire. Next, we have Rachel Kelly. Rachel's worked in sustainable finance for 13 years, developing one of the UK's first fossil fuel divestment tools. In 2018, she set up The Liminality, a sustainability consultancy working with businesses, charities, and schools to help them understand their environment and social impacts and create meaningful change. She's also an ambassador at Vision 21, a founder of Planet Cheltenham, and a non-executive director at Good With Money, a consumer finance website that helps people use their money for good. Then we have Neil Stott. Neil's the business development director at My Power Solar, based in Toddington. My Power helps businesses reduce their impact on climate change and reduce their energy costs by installing solar panels. My Power claim that installing solar PV can enable a business to generate a significant portion of its energy needs at about a third of the price it costs to purchase electricity from the grid. We have James Clark. James is a director of marketing at 7Y Energy Agency. 7Y is a local sustainability charity and non-profit that specialise in helping residents, businesses and communities make practical, sustainable changes. 7Y currently runs the Target 2030 programme, which offers SMEs in Gloucestershire a free energy efficiency survey and report, with 30% grant funding towards making carbon-saving improvements. Then we have Matt Cleveley, the Managing Director of Cleveley Electric Vehicles in Cheltenham. Having been an early adopter and promoter of EVs, Cleveley have developed a strong regional and national reputation as experts in the field and are one of the few car maintenance businesses with specialist knowledge in this area. Also like to introduce Rachel Brain, the Lead Officer for Stroud District Council's 2030 strategy, coordinating action on climate and ecological emergencies to achieve a district-wide carbon neutral by 2030 objective. Prior to this role, Rachel's led many low carbon initiatives at 7Y Energy Agency, G1 LEP and the Southwest Energy Hub. And we have Simon Pickering. Simon's been involved in the environmental movement in Gloucestershire for a long time. Amongst other things, he's the principal ecologist at Ecotricity, and chair of the Stroud District Council Environment Committee, I think, perhaps not now, but also co-chair of the G1 LEP Energy Sector Group. And we have Ben Goodair, who is Head of Corporate Responsibility and Trade Compliance at Renishaw plc. His expertise lies particularly in carbon accounting, net zero, responsible sourcing, stakeholder engagement, diversity and inclusion. We're lucky to have Andrew McKenzie with us, an independent sustainability consultant and advisor focused on creating sustainable businesses and communities that will achieve net zero carbon and are purpose driven. Formerly head of CSR at Commercial, where he deployed one of the UK's largest hydrogen-fueled vehicle fleets. He's also a sector advisor for sustainability at the Growth Hub and a member of the Cheltenham Economic Recovery Task Force. And our final panellist is David Trevillian. David is founder and principal consultant at SustainU, a responsible business consultancy based in Chepstow. He's also director of Rural Technologies Limited, a mobility as a service startup, pivoting technology to a commercialised rural smart mobility. And he's director of Forest Economic Partnership and chair of their digital connectivity group. And finally, I'm Eoin McQuone from Go Climate Positive, the Cheltenham-based certification programme for small and medium-sized businesses who want to take climate action. I'm an ambassador for Visit Gloucestershire, a member of the Cheltenham Economic Recovery Task Force, and a co-founder of the Gloucestershire Climate Commitment. Whew, what a panel. So let's move on to the discussion. So the county's carbon emissions of 3,388 kilotons of CO2 splits roughly three ways. 43% in transport, 30% in industry and commerce, and 27% in domestic houses. So I'd like to tackle the questions in that order, which means first up, it's transport. And the first topic of conversation then is how can we achieve zero emissions transport in the county? So Andrew, I know you're a strong proponent of electric vehicles and also of public transport. So I want to come to you first and ask how you think we could encourage more people to use public transport.
Do you know what? Public transport is, I think, grossly underutilised. My personal experience in the county is that public transport in Gloucestershire grossly underutilised and has a huge potential to deliver on its primary objectives, shifting people quickly, easily, efficiently, in a very cost-effective way. When it comes to personal vehicles, I think the statistics suggest that most vehicles sit idle for 97% of the time, that they just sit around doing absolutely nothing. And the intensity that goes into manufacturing each and every one of those is phenomenal, and we don't sweat those assets anywhere near as much as they possibly could be. Public transport has a huge role to play in picking up the slack on that and actually facilitating that mass transit. Those cars depreciate just by sitting there, going nowhere and doing nothing. And the cost of using public transport is something that's in there. If I was to throw a thought out there straight away as a solution, one of my for debate, because someone will no doubt be able to throw several big holes right in the middle of this as a proposition, but it strikes me that there's an opportunity for public transport to be free at the point of use within local boroughs. And if I was to pick on an analogy of holiday resorts, where often you'll go to, maybe it's a ski resort or somewhere, you're paying for the privilege of being there, but as part of being there, you have free access to the public transport in and around that area. And consequently, utilisation of that transport is it seems relatively high. Is there an opportunity, therefore, to make public transport free at the point of use in the county, covered by a mechanism? That mechanism could be various forms, but what if it was just a levy on householders of a certain amount per person per year, whatever it costs to service the charge, and if you travel outside of your local area, you pay the additional, visitors carry on paying. I don't know.
Very interesting. Thank you. Well, I asked for solutions.
Just thought I'd lob that one straight in at the very start of this.
Very interesting. Public transport free at the point of use. Anybody got any thoughts on that? David?
So it's an interesting point. I can't comment on whether free at the point of use would be absolutely a success, because I don't know any models that actually work to that, apart from possibly when we're on holiday. But what I can do is Rural Techs, we recently did research in the Forest of Dean about the motivators for people to drive to use public transport and to reduce car ownership and utilisation. Price wasn't actually in the top three. Lack of provision lack of certainty and lack of reliability are the three drivers that the residents of the Forest of Dean identified as their limiting factors for actually adopting public transport. Because if we took the existing public transport provision, not getting to work on time is going to make you unemployed quite quickly. So you actually have to have the certainty of getting there on time. You've also got multiple factors such as, how do I drop my kids off at school, then get to this place in enough time to get to work on time? How do we make all of that work? So the solution to transport, our specialism is mobility as a service, which is a posh way of saying providing people transport through an app in simple terms. But there's multiple levels of MAS, and where we need to get to is what they describe as level 4 MAS, of which there are no UK models. Even if you think of Transport for London and places like that, there are actually no UK models for MAS level 4. And what level 4 says is that you need to set out policy and societal agendas to dovetail with how you move people around. There's no silver bullets, but you then need to engage with employers and say, okay, it's great that you all start at 9 a.m, but there isn't actually enough capacity within the transport system for everybody to arrive at work at 9 a.m. So you then start looking at working with business units to try and phase in how people come to work, recognizing when schools start. So breakfast at school, so that's laid on by a lot of schools. Great that it starts at 8:30, but if you can't get to work for 9 o'clock unless you drive your car, or in your head unless you drive your car, so you then need to influence when do these things start in the morning. So there's a whole load of factors that actually influence why people take up public transport. There are no silver bullets, but actually joined up thinking, flexibility, multiple modes. What you need is a whole load of interlocking, sometimes conflicting provision to actually make a much better solution that actually ultimately makes it a quality business model that people want to use.
Very interesting. Thank you. I got your first two motivators. What was the last one? Can you remember? I got lack of provision, lack of certainty.
I was on a roll. I've forgotten that.
You were. let me know afterwards.
I think was it
two conflicting models there?
Was it reliability, David?
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that, Rachel. So, two conflicting visions there. Anybody want to share some thoughts on those? Simon.
Just 4 points, really.
Just a 4. Excellent.
I think there needs to be much better customer service to actually make buses welcoming to the people who are normal car drivers. We need real-time timetables at all bus stops and a much better app than, okay, I realise that the Stagecoach one is real-time, but it needs to be much better. I would suggest that all CEOs need to take the bus once a week, and they need the ability for flexibility, and so they need to carry bikes.
I completely agree with the bike piece, because as part of an integrated green transport solution, bikes just can't be carried on buses. And my understanding is that there's legislative restrictions in the UK that prevent that. I know our roads are slightly more compact and narrow than roads maybe States, Canada, Australia and other places, but front-loading bike racks are relatively common in those urban spaces. And they're not in the UK, which leads one to scratch one's head as to...
Yeah, I mean, if you go mountain biking in the Alps, quite a few of the buses, you just throw your bikes on the back, and they're really narrow streets. So I don't think it's a technical problem. It's a legislative and perceptional one, I think.
Yeah.
They do it in Wales as well. They have trailers in key tourist destinations where you put your bikes on.
So why not in urban centres?
Good question.
May not have the right people to answer that, but we've got the right people to ask it. So excellent, good. There's some really interesting thinking there. Thank you, Simon. You've mentioned bikes there, so let's carry on talking about bikes. What can businesses do to encourage more of their people to cycle, whether that's employees or customers? And Simon, you were very passionate about electric bikes back in November. So I'm interested to hear what everybody thinks about them as a part of the solution.
You want me to go first on bikes?
Please.
Okay then. I think there's obviously there's the Cycle to Work scheme, and it should be actively promoted for electric bikes for all employees. The biggest disincentive for people cycling is fear of traffic. And so, but there needs to be some skin in the game for car drivers. Every time a car driver cuts up a cyclist, that's probably one more car back on the road. I would suggest that every business in Gloucestershire needs to get all of their employees and their drivers to sign up to a safe pass scheme, clear pass scheme, whatever it is, whereby they will agree to pass cyclists safely and not hassle them. Because the more cyclists on the road, the less congestion there is, and greater the flow of business. So there is it's not an instant return. It's not like fleeing from a saber to a tiger. You don't get the instant gratification of driving past a cyclist safely, but you probably do the next day when that cyclist is in the car in a traffic jam in front of you. So there needs to be incentives for car drivers to act responsibly and safely around cyclists. I think also that the opportunity for e-cycle hire is an opportunity, and it's something that I know Stroud District Council with Transition Stroud are looking at with GoCar as a serious opportunity. I think also there needs to be some myth busting. There's lots of good research that the real opportunity for electric bikes is in suburban and rural areas, where I think there's some studies from the University of Leeds that demonstrated that 50% of those journeys could be taken by e-cycle rather than car. The other thing is that people need to sort out cycle parking. You have to recognise that to get anywhere near the targets for carbon zero, I think it was in 2010 that CAT in their Carbon Zero Britain 2030 calculated there needed to be a 300% increase in cycling. I suspect it's near a 500%. And so we need to make sure that A, there's the infrastructure, there's both the off-road and on-road infrastructure, so that's a 500% increase. But also there needs to be cycle parking to cope with electric bikes, that's covered, but also increasingly cargo bikes. Increasingly, a number of people are using cargo bikes both for domestic and commercial. And there's also a serious commercial opportunity. In fact, I was talking to somebody on a call this morning. There's the bike drop scheme in Stroud, and if any of you have been to Hereford, there's a very effective cycle courier scheme there. So I think there's lots of opportunities. And also just to remember, in these pressing hard times coming out of the COVID pandemic, investing in cycle infrastructure is a darn sight cheaper than building a road. The economic return for cycling is about £12 for every £1, whereas most roads possibly £1 return, maybe £2. The actual, I don't think the Birdlip bypass actually has got a positive financial figure on it. It's just less hassle, and so there's lots of things there, but it needs a rapid transformation. The big issue is at the moment is you can't get hold of bikes or electric bikes for love nor money. They're really hard to get hold of. I think most e-cycle shops are now ordering for 2022 and 23.
Wow. Okay, thank you, Simon. That's a very comprehensive batch of ideas. Brilliant, love it. So, Rachel Kelly, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, so I made the switch about a month ago now. I'd actually ordered my e-bike in October last year and picked it up last month. That's how long it took. And I'm a complete convert, as opposed to somebody who would have said that it was cheating probably a couple of years ago. And I grew up in Cambridge, so I grew up on a bicycle. It was just normal. And then moving to Gloucestershire was absolutely terrified on the road, because I think Simon's right that the main thing that's off-putting is safety, just traffic, drivers who don't know how to drive around cyclists safely. And yeah, it's been a game changer. I used to have a trailer to cart the kids around in, which was obviously pretty hard work. And now with the e-bike, it's an absolute dream. The weather doesn't faze me anymore, and I can get from A to B with very little effort. And a lot of the studies show that people are happier to travel longer distances via e-bike than normal bikes. I think the interesting thing is that we need to do more research in Gloucestershire into those micro journeys. So there's studies from Europe which show that if you can get those micro journeys right, which is largely women who are, you know, doing the school run and then carrying on the journey to work, and then maybe kind of carrying out various errands on the way to and from work as well, that actually safe cycle parking is one of the biggest ones. So knowing that your bike's not going to get nicked, also knowing that it's parked somewhere which is visible, which is well lit if it's nighttime, can really make a difference in terms of, especially from an industry perspective, making sure your workplace cycling is sorted, that people feel safe using it, then that can make a really big difference.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to see. I went past Cheltenham railway station recently, and I could see there's a massive new bike park being created there. So that was nice to see.
Which is, and it's good, but there's hardly any space for cargo bikes that's covered or well lit, and you know that's the last thing you want is to park your cargo bike up and it be full of rain when you come back.
Okay, so David, I saw you got your hand up, but I think Andrew had his up earlier, so I'll go to Andrew first and then David.
I think Ben also had his hand raised at
okay, well spotted. There's so many going on. I didn't spot them.
I was just going to echo Rachel's observations as well. Actually, e-bikes are great levelers and just improve access. Not everyone wants to be hunched in a road bike position all the time, and actually it just takes some of the sweat out of getting to work and so on. In regards to the Cycle to Work scheme, I think one of the things businesses should consider is if you're encouraging people to get into bikes, and some of those are going to be quite expensive bikes, you're not going to want to leave that out in the rain, 8 hours of rain in the day. It needs to be a covered shelter that properly protects the bike and the asset, so that someone's going to keep using it. But also, just to throw my anecdotal experience of 7 years of commuting by bike in a supposedly wet country, you don't get anywhere near as wet as frequently as you think that you would do. That actually the number of times that you get wet is really, really few and far between. Wet's wet. It doesn't matter whether it's drizzle or chucking it down, you're wet at that point. But the amount of times that you get wet, it's a few handful a year in my experience. So definitely weather is not a barrier for that. I think just picking up on Wendy's observation about parity though of behaviour for road users, cyclists have to comply with the highway code just as much as other road users. If a traffic light's red, a traffic light's red. So and that red light jumpers are few and far between, but actually there's enough to be able to put a negative spin on the perception of cyclists. So those are some thoughts from me.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Andrew. Very good. So Ben, did you want to pop something in here? I missed you earlier, sorry.
It's all right. So I think the roads are a concern for cyclists, definitely. So I mean, one of the solutions to that, particularly for us, our headquarters, which is kind of halfway between Charfield and Wootton, is we are helping the Greenway group, which is putting in a off-road cycling and walking path which connects Charfield, Wootton and Kingswood and the schools in those areas. It will go across our land, the Renewable land. We're supporting it because it will also then link up to the reopened train station in Charfield. In theory, that means we can have employees jumping on the train from Gloucester or Bristol and then cycling or walking the rest of the way. We one of the things we did to encourage cycling is we have very large covered bike sheds, which we built. They're great, and now we're retrofitting them with electricity because we hadn't considered that. So do think about the future when you build these things, but also good showers and changing rooms, because you might not be wet, but particularly, I mean, I cycle to work every now and again, and I don't arrive in the most pleasant state for my colleagues. So a good shower and somewhere to get changed is very important, I think, and gives people the confidence to do it. Public transport's another one, which we tried a company bus because actually most of our employees are in GL12. So we set up a route and we experimented for a few months, and the most we ever got on the bus on one day was 4 people, which is a little disappointing. But we do car sharing. About a quarter of our employees car share, which is great. But if you then add flexible working, car sharing will go down because people don't coordinate their lives with each other when they don't have to. And hybrid working with some people at home, some people in the office, car sharing will go down. So number of journeys will go down, but the number of vehicles needed to support the lower amount of journeys will go up.
Isn't it always the way you push it down over there, and it pops up over here, doesn't it? The problem.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. David, I'm going to come to you. Could I ask you to keep it concise, because we've got a few topics to cover, and then Matt, I'm going to come to you.
I'll do my best. So I just wanted to pick up on a few points. One of them around access to e-bikes, and obviously there's a bit of a backlog on them at the moment. How many bikes are there that aren't e-bikes? I converted a bike to an e-bike. It cost me about 700 quid. If we did conversions as part of bike to work scheme, again, going back to waste and efficiency, what's the point of building more thingies to do a thingy that kind of just needs modifying a bit? So we need to look at actually repurposing equipment that already exists. I'm sure there's lots of dusty bikes in sheds because people have been nearly taken out and don't use them. So that's one point. The other point is there needs to be accountability around infrastructure decisions, developers, those kind of things. I think we can all recall local housing development or estates where blah, 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 green travel plan, blah, 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 everybody has 2-3 cars. Where's the accountability when the developer says that 50% of the people are going to travel in this mode, and then we find that the site's been developed, they've moved on? That doesn't happen at all, because actually the infrastructure that they proclaimed was going to exist doesn't exist. Why aren't councils holding developers to account? Because, you know, there seems to be a massive disconnect there. I know what the excuses will be. I worked with house builders for years. It's to do with liability and all those kind of things. But, yeah, well, I'll keep my language family friendly. But
sure there are solutions to that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think if people were made to fix it, if it didn't work, it might sharpen people's minds on their level of wish to
very interesting
make claims. And the other bit about safety, certainly feedback we had, a big barrier to people using bikes and e-bikes and things like that, safety. If you come to the Forest of Dean, you need a mountain bike to ride on our best roads because they're just pits. You can also look forward to being taken out by coaches, buses, lorries, drivers. You know, I cycle fairly regularly around here. I won't take my children on the roads because they're dangerous. Interestingly, the district council did a survey during the key time of COVID when there weren't many cars on the road, and the overwhelming feedback was, oh my God, the roads are lovely without all the cars. I'm, you know, walking the streets, I'm cycling, I'm doing things I never did before. But the good news is that we are rapidly returning back to normal. So all of those positive benefits are disappearing out the window.
Well, thank you for that positive note, David. But you gave us a whole load of possible solutions beforehand, so I'll forgive you for that. Wow, yeah, all sorts of interesting ideas there. E-bike conversions isn't something I'd heard of before, so thank you. So, Matt, I'm sure you've been champing at the bit to talk about transport. So I don't know if you had something to add about bikes, but then, of course, we will come on to you to talk about electric vehicles.
Yeah, well, I think David actually covered a couple of the things that I was going to say anyway, because I did commute on bikes myself, backwards and forwards to work on a race bike, and the roads are atrocious. They're in condition, and also the other traffic not being aware of bikes or considerate about them. So it is quite dangerous. But also what we're overlooking is that as people in this meeting, we are still fairly in the minority that actually give a monkeys about zero transportation and emission-free transport. And the vast majority will choose their form of transport on how easy it is for them to use and convenient. It's nothing to do with climate change, it's just convenience. And if you ask anyone, you're going to give up your car, move to a bike, you can still do your shopping in it and get to work, and most of them will say no because it's easier. And I'm guilty of that, in the fact that yes, I'm driving emission free from a petrol and diesel point of view, but there's still brake and tire emissions that my car is giving out. But I'm using my car because it's more convenient for me. It costs me very little to run as an EV, and it's only me traveling around in it. I know that that's not the right thing to do, but it's the right thing for me to do. And I think changing people's perceptions and understanding of what we're trying to achieve is going to be far easier than, or not easier, but is an important factor, rather than just sort of waving a stick at people and saying we should all be riding, because there's no actual motivation to want to ride at all.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The positive motivation is a underutilized tool in this area. So I did see, I can see your hand raised, Simon, there. So I'm afraid I'm not going to come to you on this one, because we need to move on to other topics. But if you could if you want to pop a comment in the chat, that'd be great. But Matt, we haven't given you a chance to talk about your specialist subject, and you're quite right. It'd be great if everybody moved on to public transport and bikes, but the reality is, because of the convenience factor and other reasons, I suspect a lot of people are still going to be in cars for a long time. And so, you know, the country and the world is kind of deciding to move, address this by moving to electric vehicles. So, in your experience, what can we do to encourage people to make that switch?
It's all about education. There's so much negative information out there on electric vehicles that is fueled by or paid for by the fuel lobbies and the big oil businesses that are going to lose out massively if we continue on this positive road towards electrification. So for me, and that's why our business exists, it's all about education, letting people understand. And I'm not everyone that walks in here, we don't turn around to them and say, an EV, you must buy an EV, that's the one for you. It's about understanding people's journeys, making people realize that they don't use their cars as much as they thought they did, that they don't need to buy a car that has a minimum range of 400 miles, because there is the infrastructure that's constantly improving. It's not perfect, but there's the infrastructure to be able to do it. And I think if we as a county look towards continuing our push for zero emissions and making that easier with having infrastructure within our workplaces, so that we can have electric car charging at workplaces, at shopping centres, at offices, office blocks, in car parks. It's not all down to the council to install this infrastructure. I think it's down to the public sector as well. And if anyone's been to Milton Keynes, you go to Milton Keynes and every street corner pretty much there's a charging point. That's why there's massive adoption of electric vehicles in Milton Keynes, because of the convenience. Again, it's back to making it as easy as possible for people to just go about their daily life with as little inconvenience as possible. And yes, I can sit here and I can wax lyrical about how EVs can save you money, about how they don't cost the earth to run, and how clean they are to use. But it's about letting people understand the benefits and educating them of the pros and pointing them in the right direction of the fixes that will make it easier for them to adopt it themselves.
Right. Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to put you on the spot now and you're going to hate me for this one. What's the one thing that converts most people? What do you say?
Cost. When you do a TCO, a total cost of ownership, and compare running an electric vehicle against running a petrol and diesel vehicle, the numbers stack up in the EV's favour very, very quickly. And that's the one thing that is probably least advertised about it, everyone looks at an EV and goes, wow, 30 plus grand to buy in the first place, I'm not touching that. But when you look at how long I'm going to use that car, how many miles am I going to do in that car, what are the maintenance costs on that car, and you factor in total cost of ownership, an EV is an absolute no-brainer.
Right, thank you, Matt. So thank you for all those wonderful thoughts. I'm going to move the topic on a moment. If I can just try and summarize briefly, I think what I'm hearing is that above all, we need to make the more sustainable modes of transport as convenient as possible. They need to be available and convenient, and that seems to be across the message across the board. And we need to think of it as a whole system, is what I'm hearing as well, and make sure that demand or that supply is matching demand, and maybe even exceeding demand where it's needed. So we need to have a joined up approach, I think. But I also have to capture a lot of detail there. So good stuff. Thank you. Right. So the next biggest category of our emissions in the county is industry and commerce. So the next topic I want to discuss is how can we achieve zero emissions businesses in the county? And given that we have a representative from one of the biggest businesses in the county, at Renewable, it seems an obvious place to go to talk to Ben first, and especially as manufacturing is a very important sector for Gloucestershire, and it accounts for a fair chunk of our emissions. So, Ben, what are the specific challenges for manufacturing achieving net zero or zero?
If we're talking about emissions in Gloucestershire, which would be our scope 1 and potentially some scope 2 emissions, it's really easy because they're completely within our control. We can decide what electricity we buy, which other fuels we use, and which vehicles we are using. That's all within our control. We can get that down very quickly. So we did some work recently, and our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in Gloucestershire over the past 5 years have gone down 75%, because we can control it. Now, scope 3, everything we're buying in, which is still our responsibility, but obviously goes far beyond the reaches of Gloucestershire. It's much harder, much harder. It's harder to measure. It's harder to, once you've measured it, it's harder to use your influence to persuade all those people in your supply chain, whether upstream or downstream, to reduce emissions. Now, we're lucky that our products are designed to increase efficiency for our customers, and so usually as a byproduct using our products, they are reducing their emissions because their efficiencies are increasing. But it's not the same for all products, and so that is tricky. I think it's scope 3 is roughly, for most people, around 80% of their emissions for an organization. And so, I mean, measuring it is my first challenge. It's a very, very big challenge. I don't know the answer to it, but it's a journey that we'll get there.
Yeah, thank you. So for those who are not familiar with the terminology, scopes 1 and 2 are about the energy that you're using in your operations, and scope 3 is pretty much everything else, but in particular for manufacturing, that includes supply chain and all the embodied carbon in the products and services you buy, which I think, Ben, is what you're alluding to. That's when you're a global business and you've got global supply chains, just even understanding it is a challenge, never mind reducing it.
Simon just asked a question, what's the cost of that reduction? Most of that was cost neutral, or at no cost, because most of it was changing our electricity that we buy to renewable electricity. What remains is gas. That's going to have a cost because we're going to have to re-engineer our sites to remove gas boilers and remove gas out of our air conditioning systems and things. that's a challenge, but it's as things wear out or need expensive enough repairs, we swap them out and redesign our systems. I don't advocate that we invest tens of millions of pounds to rip everything out and replace it all with new super efficient stuff, because actually I'll be doing that again in 10 years, and it's not a sensible way of doing it. It's not a sensible use of resource.
Cool. Thank you, Ben. So, accepting the difficulties and the challenges of managing a supply chain, and that's we could spend another hour or so just discussing that. We shouldn't let that be the enemy of getting on and doing what we can do, which is perhaps addressing our energy use, as you said there. So, and you mentioned use of renewables. One option is about on-site generation and on-site solar, and it feels like a good opportunity to bring Neil into the conversation here, and say, well, what's your experience of businesses taking on self-generation, and what's the best way of encouraging them to do so?
I guess from my point of view, there's two elements. You've got the retrofit market, so the businesses that are in situ, and it's retrofitting to their technology, and then you've also got the new build, the new construction side of things. So on the, I'll start with the retro side of things first and foremost. That market is a very, very positive place, and it's as Matt was saying on the vehicle side of things, it's a communication and education element. Once you share the benefits, be it environmental and commercial, it becomes a very, very easy decision for businesses to make. And I think it's getting that message out there, but we're seeing more businesses coming through now in a positive way, focusing on the green agenda rather than just on commercials. And I would say previously it was justified on the commercials and the green was a nice element to it, and now that's flipping around. So I think the messaging and the importance is certainly getting out there. Where it is quite disappointing at the moment is in the new build market. Whilst things are changing, they're changing very slowly. And we've got, obviously, from an efficiency point of view, which is absolutely the right way to do things, you reduce before you produce. So in the retrofit, again, efficiency first, reduce, and then you look at what your production. And in the new build, the focus has been on efficiency. But the on-site generation for new build seems to be still at a very much a token gesture stage, and it doesn't consider, firstly, the applications and the consumption and the needs of that building and the business that's likely to be going in there. And it also doesn't factor in the needs of a wider industrial estate. So we've seen a number of new industrial estates going up in and around Gloucestershire. And I have to say it's really disappointing that in most cases you get a football pitch size roof with a postage stamp size PV system on the roof. And we know probably in a couple of years' time that the owners of that building will come to us and probably ask the question, can we retrofit because they've got the use. And there's been a huge amount of investment in infrastructure to get the power to that site. And if they thought holistically about operations, then maybe they would have had localized generation, be it wind, be it solar, and potentially battery kind of backup to help balance out the requirements. And rather than spending that millions on pipes going into these places, think about locally generating and being sustainable in a local way. So they're the sort of two markets that we see, and one which is growing and people are aware, and one which is frustratingly, because you would think that legislation could change that pretty quickly, is just taking sort of, in my view, baby steps.
That's very interesting. I hadn't appreciated that difference there. So you'd think it would be easier to fit this stuff in at new build time than than retrofit.
Well, it's more cost effective as well. It's, you know, it's done at construction phase, but it's just not there.
Interesting. Anybody got any thoughts on how that could be improved?
Yes, I find it a massively frustrating experience having just installed 30 kilowatts on our 30 kilowatts on our workshops here as well. That it's not thought about, but it's not just. It's again going back to a level of building control and things like that. It's not the council's problem, but when they go to these builders, once they're doing planning permissions, they're not insisting that as part of the planning permission that renewables are included in that, and it just is crazy. And if there's legislation, then it would help to start with. Yeah, well, I love having the solar on here, and I've invested massively in the business and in my home to include solar in it, and I will keep doing that as long as we keep expanding.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
It's interesting, the sort of architects out there. So REBA have declared a climate emergency, and all of their members are quite focused on that. And what they are doing is putting the renewable energy considerations into the designs, into the plans. But frustratingly, the term value engineering comes in because it's a cost of construction, and it gets stripped out. They ask the question: Does it keep the rain out of the building? No, the roof does that. So it's sat on the roof and it's extra. Okay, it's going to add, I don't know, 20, 30, 50,000 pounds to the cost of the building. Am I going to recover that? Well, no, the owner will recover that over time with savings on their electricity bill. But from me at this point in time, actually, as the building contractor, it's not doesn't make sense to do. So it's lots of noises in the right places, but again, it's falling on stony ground.
Interesting. Thank you. Simon, you wanted to come in.
I was just asking you your experience. Is that because there are not sufficiently strong local planning policies that insist on that? Or is it a grid capacity issue? So
My experience, the answer is yes.
It's the lack of strong planning policies.
It's both, is what we've discovered with solar. So we have built new buildings and integrated solar into them. So we built a new building, and the planning department insisted we put 30 solar panels on our building. We've now got 250,000 kilowatt generating capacity on that roof because we could. So why wouldn't you? You know, when we're already spending £20 million, so you know what's a bit extra. But then we've retrofitted other buildings on the same site. It's been very difficult, but we've done it at greater cost, as Neil said. But the local grid capacity for us to feed back is very, very limited. And our site over in Cardiff, we're not allowed to feed back into the grid. They've just said no.
But on that, have you then input into the Western Power Distribution's 5-year plan, or has the council done it on your behalf to say?
No, we have done it.
Okay.
But also, you know, our roofs are now full of solar panels, and we'd like to have wind turbines because we're going to run out of solar panel room. But we're not allowed.
Love to supply you with several.
Council won't let us put them up, so we could have them and put them in a shed. You know, that's our challenge. We can't get the permission to go down the next line, and we've got enough land to actually essentially put 2 or 3 up large generator wind turbines and create a local grid for the local village, and we could probably supply the entire village. So but we're not allowed.
That you'd think that might be an easy way for councils to meet start to meet some of their commitments. But of course, no doubt people involved in council would tell me that there are lots of conflicting needs that they need to try and balance.
You would, but I mean, it is a political thing. It's a perception thing. People don't like the look of wind turbines, and that's currently the prevailing view at the moment.
They're not pretty.
They're lovely.
I like them.
In the eye of the beholder, isn't it?
Yeah. Apparently, though, people walking on the Cotswold Way don't want to look down and see wind turbines.
No. Maybe they should look up, because surely putting them on the hill would be an even better place for them. I don't know.
That's true, yeah.
Richard, we haven't heard from you yet, and you've got your hand up, so let's.
It's just another issue. It's more on houses. I found that not only are houses not being built with solar panels on, but there's all sorts of restrictions to prevent the people wanting to put solar panels on after they bought the house. So covenants saying that not for 10 years, the roof trusses aren't strong enough for retrofitting solar panels. So going back to Simon's point, I think there's definitely local planning issues on that. But I know that there's national housing targets and things like that. But yeah, I think Gloucestershire as a whole could gang up on the volume builders and just say you could only build in Gloucestershire if you are going to comply with these energy efficiencies. Then that might work.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to come back to housing shortly. I just want to give James a chance to give us a perspective here, because I know you obviously advise a lot of businesses on what they can do. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think I've got a couple of thoughts as the conversation's been going on. To Ben's point about the challenges to Scope 3 emissions and reducing the sort of supply chain emissions that you're responsible for, I've just popped a little link in the chat, which is to a TED Talk I saw recently, and everybody can point towards TED Talks, a nice 10-minute way of simplifying the entire world and thinking you've got all the answers, I know. But it is an interesting look at actually how much is the green premium for the end user if we were to shift massive markets, things like steel, things like concrete, things like all these construction materials to being more low carbon, and it's worth food for thought. So do take a little look at that, and it is only 10 minutes of your time. I'm a massive fan of Neil and what he does at My Power, and we work very closely with My Power to retrofit businesses with on-site generation at the moment. We do an awful lot of work with businesses looking at their energy efficiency opportunities, and funnily enough, solar is probably the cheapest per carbon emission solution that our businesses are putting in at the moment. Partly because it can be done on scale, partly because just how much of the power that they use is offset by that local generation. And yes, there are the issues for feeding into the grid, and yes, the battery storage is expensive. But if you simply look on the point of to the point of reducing the carbon emissions that you are responsible for, Scope 2 on site, then we're finding that solar is no longer the expensive bling that makes it look good on the outside but not really do the work on the inside. It is competing just as much with other energy efficiency methods for our local businesses. My other point that I do want to raise here is that we touched on it in the transport stuff. We'll touch on it again in the housing conversation, but it all comes down to affordability, and not every business in Gloucestershire is Renishaw sized. We can't rely on one or two massive businesses, as important as those businesses are, and as trend setting as they are, and as culture forming as they are. We need to also be able to help small businesses, which make up 99%, as we know, of the businesses in the country and in Gloucestershire. How do you help those with smaller sites and smaller footprints, but collectively being responsible for most of that 30% or whatever the figure was you gave us here at the beginning? How do you help those to reduce their climate impact and feel that they are making a contribution that is worthwhile? Because some of them are still they're still in survival mode. They're looking at their next year as being the savior of their last year, and these are not people in a position to make big investments, capital investments in their in their energy efficiency and in their reduction of carbon emissions going forward. So we really, really need to be talking with those businesses as well. I appreciate that we need to have some leaders, but we need to be thinking about those small businesses as well.
Well, we have some of those in the panel today.
Yeah.
To that point, is there any help that's available at the moment that you're able to offer?
It sounds like a leading question. We're running the Target 2030 scheme, which is a grant funding scheme at the moment. For a little bit longer, we still have some EU money, and we are helping to use it to reduce the carbon emissions of our local businesses. And we've worked with hundreds of those over a couple of years now, some of which are here in the room, some of which are sitting on the panel. Hello, Matt. And there's plenty of money still available, and actually between you and I and the people in the room, we're seeing successes with Target 2030 that a lot of other programs are not seeing across the country. So we are seeing a good take up within Gloucestershire, and as a result, it's likely that there will be more money available. So we're actively encouraging small businesses to basically get in touch with us, and we can help fund some of those initial capital outlays, because that affordability is always going to be key. If you don't get people on the train in the first place, then that journey won't even begin to start. So that's what the recommendation I can give is get in touch with Target 2030 and our team here.
Fantastic. You heard it here first, folks. So I'm going to wrap up that section of the conversation, and I think I can sum it up with 2 words: planning and affordability. So we're going to move on to the last section, and those of you who haven't spoken yet on the panel, be warned, we'll be coming to you soon. If I can find my last question. Where is it? Here we go. So, oh, hello. I'm pressing all sorts of buttons I shouldn't do. So let's move on to talk about the last section, which corresponds to 27% of the carbon footprint of the county, housing. But I want to broaden it a little bit. So how can we achieve zero emissions housing and encourage individuals in the county to make the changes that we need? So who should we go to first here? How about Rachel Brain? We haven't heard anything from you. Let's go to you. So what are your thoughts on either of these, housing and what we can do to improve our housing, but also to encourage individuals to make the changes?
Well, I think that my first comment would really apply to any of the topics you would wish to discuss onto this agenda, which is it's not about us doing things, it's about individuals doing things, and that covers such a broad range of types of people and levels of understanding and resource and all sorts of things. And so the big issue here is that the schemes, the funding, the policy is all directed at retrofit, and there's no revenue for that work that needs to be done to get those individuals to take it up. So that's like a key issue. So what can we do in spite of that? I think that, obviously I work at a council at the moment. We've got a district-wide commitment. So that question is very kind of key to us, because we've made a commitment to lead the district to carbon neutrality by 2030, and yet we have really very limited power in that, because so much of the emissions lie with those individuals. So I think the most important thing that we're doing in that, apart from, we just had James talking about Target 2030, but there's obviously been a very long running programme of domestic retrofits that 7Y have managed on behalf of all the local authorities, that local authorities in Gloucestershire have invested in for nearly 20 years now, is trying to think about how we can get those people involved and the way other people involved, because that's quite vulnerable home focused, not exclusively, but that's where a lot of the funding goes. And it's about getting people involved in the decision making, I think, and by that, I think it was quite interesting to hear some of the things that have been said before about the offers that businesses have made and have not been taken up. And I just wondered how much of that was that being done to employees without their consulting, and because I think consultation and involving in those decision making, even if you know ultimately what the solution might be, people have got to go on a journey to get there for themselves in order to take it up. So so community action, community groups talking is a lot about it, which is probably not what you expected, because I expect you to talk to me for me to talk to you about how we take up, how we leverage in those national funds and how we get people to take them up. And I think that, I suppose in a way I am, because what really gets people to take them up is that desire to engage with it all in the first place.
I wasn't expecting anything in particular, right? other than the benefit of your expertise, so that's great.
Yeah.
Cool. And building on from that, I'm going to go to the other Rachel, because last in November you spoke a lot about the need to address wealth inequalities in this transition as well. So how can we do that, and how can we then broaden the net of all the people that are involved in this effort?
Yeah, so I think that, if I remember rightly, if I can remember all the way back to November, I think that was a kind of conversation around those climate justice issues. So how do we make this transition as kind of people friendly as possible, as well as planet friendly? And obviously we know that those on low incomes are contributing the least to the issue, not just within Gloucestershire, not just within the UK, but globally. And they're likely to be impacted the most by you know, the coming issues that the climate is going to throw at us. So yeah, I think it's important to remember, and I think 7Y are really good at this. They do a lot of stuff around, you know, there's still rural council housing in Gloucestershire, which has coal burning as their primary source of heating. And I think it's really just important to remember that when we're talking about the transition to net zero, that there's a huge disparity. You know, we do have massive wealth inequality across the county. That we need to remember that solutions have to multi-solve across that. So we can't just be thinking environment, we also have to be thinking about social impact.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So anybody got any thoughts on how we can maybe deal with both those issues, the need to get engagement and to consult with more people, and the need to address social justice as we do it? Richard.
Right, I'm going to talk about the idea I came up with last time.
Because I was going to bring that up if you didn't, so.
Okay. No, I think part of the, well, certainly for sort of owner-occupiers, part of the issue might be confusion about what to do next, what's the right thing to do, what am I investing in, will it be redundant technology in a few years' time, or, you know, what's the best way forward, and what this grant is supporting this but not this, and it's all very intervention-based grants rather than trying to get net zero. So I think, and I'm glad we got a good panel here, because everybody here could actually play a part in this, is an idea of like a low energy co-op, where it's sponsored by a trusted source, say Gloucestershire County Council, and it gives proper advice on you know, what steps to take to make your home more energy efficient in the right order, fabric first and then renewables, and then eventually when if tariff rates on electricity come down properly, then move to electric heating systems. And then the idea would be that the county promotes the whole idea to as many people as possibly can, but also it offers this advice, but also points people who want to engage into businesses that install solar panels, that install EV chargers, that install insulation, more efficient boilers and that kind of thing. But not, and a couple of things I think it could appeal to is, like, I grew up in the 70s, and when they were advertising gas boilers, it was all about the comfort there. It wasn't necessarily the cost benefit argument, which I think sometimes can be a bit of a red herring argument. the comfort, but also promote the whole idea, hey, we're not doing this just for saving money or getting one over the electricity companies. It's, you know, we are doing this to reduce carbon emissions and to promote our long-term well-being, such that we live in a county that will not flood, that will not overheat, that has good air quality, all the things associated with unsustainable burning of fossil fuels. So there we are. That's my idea there, the co-op. And yeah, I don't know, Simon, I phoned you that proposal last time. I don't know whether that went anywhere, but Rachel, maybe afterwards we could have a chat about that. There we are. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Richard. Did you, and then Rachel, whether you want to come in, or James, whether you want to, because that seems like that's kind of
I know James
overlapping with your territory there. How do you how's what Richard has suggested different to what you do?
Well, I mean, James will need to say something after me. I think that what Richard talks about is kind of, you know, bang on. Really, that is what is needed, and the fact that there's so much synergy between what Richard was saying and what 7Y have been doing for over, you know, for nearly 20 years, really emphasises my point that the marketing, the awareness raising is just not there. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that it isn't that people, you know, that we, after COVID at Stroud District Council, I was fortunate to be in a place where I had some funding I could use to do some market research. So I paid and commissioned to have a survey done of Stroud District householders, and we did businesses, but we're talking about householders, so I'll talk just about householders for now. So we did a big bit of market research, so lots of questionnaires out, which were very carefully designed by me and my team, and also 7Y, based on their experience of delivery, had some input into those. And one of the things that there was some really good findings there about what people's current intention to invest in their own homes was, and what was motivating them to do that. And the clear messages from that, and as I say, it's post-COVID, so it's highly relevant because a lot of this stuff has been done previous to COVID. So this is when people really knew what their financial impacts on them were of this situation that we found themselves in. And what you find is that the vast majority of homeowners have such a low intention of investing in energy efficiency or low carbon measures, and the questions were really carefully worded to do that, and would only do it really if it was part of another decoration process. And when you get them to think as well into the sort of short, medium and long-term future, the amount of money that they felt they would have to invest in their own home was so far from the mark of what is required. So it's a complete lack of intention, a complete lack of understanding of the scope of what needs to be achieved. And it all comes down to something, which is a comment that I was thinking of when we were talking about transport. It's about desirability. You know, it's not the blingy new kitchen in a lot of senses. It's something that goes on the roof or is tucked away in a cupboard. And people are not, you know, when people have got a bit of money, especially after a time of hardship, they want those little luxuries that they can afford. And energy is just not, you know, sustainable energy in that sense is just not seen in that kind of way. And that's why the social movement, the marketing, the campaigning, the awareness is so much more important right now than grant schemes, in my opinion.
Excellent, right. Thank you. That's really, really interesting perspective. James, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, just really quickly, because I know there's hands up around the room, but I 100% agree with that in many ways, because what came to mind when Richard you were talking about your sort of the education side of things, the fabric first side of things. Yes, that is correct, but that is absolutely, as Rachel says, not what people want. People don't want you to come into their house, to their home, to their sanctuary, to their castle and rip the walls down and change the furniture. They'd much rather have solar on the roof where it doesn't disrupt their home. They don't need to redecorate the whole place. And so we are finding that we're fighting battles between, do you do the things that save the most energy, or do you do the things that are most likely to be taken up by the most people? Do you see what I mean? So there is that balancing act that we need to consider there. You're exactly right as well in that we absolutely, 7Y would love to be at the heart of a low carbon hub, a low carbon co-op, and the group around the table today would make such a strong co-op, I think, if we were to be able to coordinate everything. As with all organisations in the public sector or in the third sector like we are, it's a struggle to make all of the funding streams necessary match up. You know, you have a bit of funding for one thing at one time, and then you have a bit of funding for something else at another time. And unfortunately, that often dictates what's possible and doesn't join those things up. So perhaps that co-op model is a really powerful way that we as a county could find a solution that helps these things make progress and move forward together. Do you see what I mean? Rather than waiting on a bit of this and a bit of that. One last comment really, just so we don't lose the sort of fuel poverty and the energy justice angle that Rachel brought up earlier. Far be it from me to, you know, these sorts of meetings are often good for saying, oh, well, if only government were doing more here and if only government were doing more there. But just as a bit of positive news, positive to my mind anyway, the way that we calculate and look at fuel poverty recently. This year they changed the metric for how you decide who is in fuel poverty, and whereas before, to give you a very, very short history, it was all about if you had low income and your home was really expensive to heat, you were therefore in fuel poverty. And so that meant that the ways of combating fuel poverty focused on how do you cheaply heat a home so that people are warm and healthy. You see what I mean? Now it's just slightly shifted, and I think in a positive manner, to looking at whether you have a low income and living in an inefficient home. Now, that may sound like a terminology. What it means is that money is much more likely and support is much more likely to be available to those vulnerable and lower income families to help their home be more efficient, not just put in the cheapest, dirtiest way of being able to heat the home and they're solved. Do you see what I mean?
Oh, I think we've lost James there, but I think we got the gist of his comment there. So Simon, you've had your hand up for a while. Can I ask you, I'll bring you in, but can I ask you to kind of bring your point in perhaps a couple of minutes maximum, please? Because we're getting towards a point where we're going to need to think about rounding up. Oh, you're on mute, Simon. Hey, sorry, it had to happen at some point, didn't it? It had to happen.
I put my hand down, but didn't unmute. There you go. Okay. I think one of the things you have to remember is that for older properties and people who have been lucky enough to save during the pandemic, if you're living in an older property and it's not insulated, good insulation, the actual return on investment per annum is much higher than an ISA. An ISA you can get 0.8%, 1.25 if you stick for 5 years, but a return on an old property well invested between 5 and 16%. So I think finance packages are the key, and getting people to understand. I've just put a link to the article that's on Business West that I wrote about that. But I think one of the things, I would personally be willing to invest in somebody else's house as a package. If a past 2035 assessor had said, well, yeah, we can insulate that house, it'll bring a return of about 5 to 10% on the heating savings if they use it sensibly, I'd be willing to invest in that for 10, 15 years and take a cut of only 3%. So I think one of the keys is, and that might be a way of where we're actually sort of investing in other people's homes. The key is getting the funding packages together. I think it's to do with finance and perception of finance rather than the actual measures, I think is really important. Yes, I agree with you, James. Yes, good way of offsetting your own carbon. I think that's one of the key things. I think finance is absolutely crucial to this and getting it right.
Thank you. And that could be perhaps another element of Richard's call. a community finance scheme. So it's all in one place. I love it. Right, Rachel, I can see you've got your hand up, but I think I'm probably going to have to disappoint you. Sorry, I think we need to start rounding up. But by all means, pop a comment in the chat if you want to. So, if I'm summarising that, I think I'm hearing there's a great need to actually focus on communication and in creating a desirability to do this, which actually I think is good news, because I think that's something which locally we could be empowered to actually get on and do. And there's, a bit of, we identify a need for massive collaboration here on a local scale. So collaborating, joining up all the dots, and perhaps getting everybody who's involved in this involved in some sort of collaborative effort of the type that Richard and James are talking about. And thirdly, the need to create innovative joined up funding solutions is kind of what I'm hearing. So thank you, everybody. Well, and I asked for solutions, and I feel like we've been given a lot of potential solutions there. And what I'm just going to do is just have a quick look and see if we've got any questions in the chat. Has anybody from the observers, if you like, the audience, anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask at this point? A quick look through. Anybody shy? Any questions here? There's lots of interesting points in the chat. So I'd recommend everybody save the chat so you can pick up those points. Okay, we haven't got any other further questions, so I am going to wrap it up then, just to say a huge thank you to all the panelists. I have been making copious notes. I shall try to get those notes out to everybody and share them, because I think actually there's some really important conversations we've had here, and I'd ask you to share those with people who have influence. Some of you are involved with some of the local councils, I know, so I'll put it out to you, and please do share those around. I've learned a lot today. I hope everybody has too. Fascinating discussion. Thanks also to Louise for hosting for us on Zoom today. And there will be a recording of this discussion put on YouTube in a few days' time, and I would really encourage you to watch it, and also to share that with as many people as you can, because the more people who watch this, the more ideas and solutions we will get. So thank you all very much indeed, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Really good. Thank you. Yeah.
Take care, all.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Richard.